Is there any hope for the Spectacular Spider-Man? I've made lots of videos about this series, including my own variation of what Season 3, 4, and 5, and 6 would have been like, and even an Ultimate Spider-Man spin-off series. And as we know, Season 3 got cancelled due to legal reasons. I made a video a couple of months back explaining the reason why it can never come back, but ever since the whole Disney and Sony scandal with the rights of Spider-Man, and him being able to retain his position in the MCU, some people have asked me to make a video explaining what this does for the rights. If Spider-Man went back to Sony, even though we know he's staying in Marvel for at least another couple of years, can the Spectacular Spider-Man return? Well, the short answer to that is no. Roll credits. You still here? I mean, you've probably seen the bar at the bottom of the video and thought, okay, so this video isn't over. Well, I want to delve into, if the Spectacular Spider-Man came back, how would it have to happen? I've explained why it can never come back and why it's near to impossible, but now I'm going to do the opposite end of the spectrum. If the show were to come back for a third season, how would it have to happen? What would have to happen for this show to come back? But first, before we get there, let's talk about why the Marvel-Sony deal with Spidey in the MCU doesn't affect anything in terms of cartoons and merchandise, because you guys are a little bit confused about that. Sony sold the merch rights to Spider-Man to Disney way back in 2011, but before this happened, the rights to a Spider-Man TV show were also sent back to Marvel Disney, and this is why we got the Ultimate Spider-Man TV series, which was on Disney XD, and thus Spectacular Spider-Man got cancelled because Sony owns the distribution rights to Spectacular Spider-Man, but Disney are the ones that can make a Spider-Man TV show. So this has nothing to do with Spider-Man staying in or out of the MCU. If Spider-Man leaves the MCU, Sony has back full creative control of Spider-Man and his stories, since he's not in the MCU anymore, which is owned by Disney, and that is the movie side of Spider-Man. With that being said, how would the Spectacular Spider-Man come back if it were to come back? So we know that Disney owns the rights to produce a Spider-Man TV show, and they are in full creative control. This means that Sony has no intervention into what happens with TV shows regarding Spider-Man, only the movie stuff. And this includes the Ultimate Spider-Man, this includes new Marvel Spider-Man, which is currently in its Season 2, which is also on Disney XD. But Sony Pictures Television still own the rights to Spectacular Spider-Man. Although Marvel Animation and Marvel Enterprises were involved with the series, due to Sony's disinclusion, the series could not be continued. Now, there are three options. One is more likely than the other two, but at the end of the day, all three are highly unlikely. So the first option is that all the rights to Spider-Man and everything goes back to Sony. This would mean that Sony have full creative control over the TV shows, the movies, the merch, everything, and they could do whatever they wanted with the character. They could continue Sam Raimi's series, they could make Spider-Man 4, they could go through with the Amazing Spider-Man 3, and that is right, they could make the Spectacular Spider-Man Season 3 as well. However, the likelihood of Disney surrendering some of the assets they've already fought for from Marvel's most successful character is next to impossible. For this to happen, Disney would have to crash. There would have to be a valid reason for Disney to want a lot of money, and I mean big bucks, because they are literally one of the biggest, if not the biggest corporation in the entire world, for films, TV, and all that kind of stuff. And they would have to sell what they have of Spider-Man for a lot of money. And the likelihood is they wouldn't even sell to Sony, because Sony wouldn't offer them the most money. At the end of the day, Sony Pictures are in a lot of money troubles, especially after The Amazing Spider-Man 2 and 2014. They have lost a lot of money from that division. The second option here is that Sony and Marvel come to a deal like they did with the MCU Spider-Man. Although this show means a lot to the fans, and this seems like a wise move, you've got to remember that Spectacular Spider-Man means absolutely jack to them, since the deal would barely make any money for both parties. Disney are better off just producing their own Spider-Man series. The third and final option is that Disney just outright buys Sony Pictures. Now, here's the thing. This one seems like the most likely thing to happen. Well, not this exact scenario, but something along these lines. There have been rumors that companies like Apple would invest within Sony Pictures, and the deal is that if any company buys out Sony Pictures, the rights for Spider-Man go directly back to Marvel, or in this case now, that would be Disney, which could include the Spectacular Spider-Man. Now, here's the reason why it's unlikely for Disney to just simply invest in Sony. Yes, while it would give full right to the webhead back to Marvel, including all the movie rights, so that means no MCU trouble anymore, the TV and everything that Sony have, but we have to realize that Spider-Man is not worth the purchase of an entire movie corporation. Sony Pictures is in a losing battle anyway, so for Disney to buy them would be doing them a favour. And yes, while Disney would acquire the likes of Jumanji, Annie, Grudge, and a couple of other movie franchises that Sony Pictures currently own, you gotta think, is it really worth it? would the purchase of this have anything other in it than Spider-Man? I mean, Spider-Man is Sony's greatest asset. There is nothing other than maybe the PlayStation that Sony have that is so valuable. It's like a piece of gold in a pit of coal. Spider-Man is worth loads, but unfortunately to business execs, not the purchase of an entire corporation and film division. So with that being said, that is pretty much it. Is there any hope for Spectacular Spider-Man? Probably not. And this is the final video I'm going to make about this. I'll link the other one in the description below next to the related video tab in the description. You can go and watch that. That is about why it most likely will never come back. This one is about, is there any hope for this? And if there were, how would it happen? And as you can see by the scenarios I've listed, it's probably not going to happen. The best we can hope for is just Sony crashes and Sony Pictures just goes bankrupt, and that means that obviously the rights go back to Disney, but this still doesn't mean that Spectacular Spider-Man could come back, purely because Disney have their own thing going on. Is it really worth it to bring it back? We don't really know. There's a lot of legal reasons, and there could be more legal reasons to why it couldn't happen than just this on the surface. Obviously, we're not the corporations, we're not the business execs behind the closed doors, but on the surface, this is what would have to happen from our perspective. Could it come back? Tell me what you guys think in the comments below. Obviously, I've continued the series with 4 seasons on my channel. You can go check them out. If you want some kind of conclusion to this series, you can come up with your own, and if you have any ideas for that, tell me in the comments below. I'm very interested to hear what you guys think. And with that being said, thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.